Hello, everybody. We begin now the first session of the CoReMA symposium on the recipe. This morning, we had the introduction. Now we have the real first session. I'm Bruno Laurioux, one of the organizers with Helmut Klug of this symposium. The session theme tonight is Out of the East. That means we will discuss about text, recipes coming from the East, in fact, from Islamic countries, from Islam countries, from the Middle Eastern Islam or from the Western Islam. May I introduce Julia Eibinger? She's here, yes. She will be the moderator for the QA part. You can ask questions as early as you want in the Q&A button in Zoom. And if we can, we will, after you have asking your question, you will give you the possibility to ask the question really. That means we will open your microphone if we can, if we have time to do that. Okay, so it will be the task of Julia. I have the pleasure to introduce and to present the first speaker. The first speaker is Melitta Adamson. Melitta, are you here? You have to open maybe your camera and your microphone. Yes. Hello, Melitta. So Melitta Weiss Adamson is professor at the Western Ontario University in Canada. She is a really specialist, renowned specialist on cookery books. You remember the first time we met, it was in Canada. It was in Montreal, in fact, for a congress, a famous congress in 1990, from manuscript to the table, organized by Carole Lambert at the University of Montreal. And you exposed the role of medieval physicians in the diffusion of culinary recipes and cooking practices. We were already in the subject of today, in fact. And after you published many books on the question of cookery, of medieval cookery, especially of German medieval cookery, but not only, you translated the Buch von guter Speise, which is really an important book in the German cookery books. You edited a book on regional cuisines of medieval Europe, published by Routledge in 2002. I have to mention also a recent paper you published on Mediterranean cuisine north of the Alps, the cookbook in St. Florian, which is one of our favorite cookbook, in fact, in the CoReMA project. So we read, of course, your paper with pleasure and attention. Now, tonight, you will, or maybe today for you, maybe it's in the morning in Canada, we will hear your communication on Ibn Butlān's. Ibn Butlān is well known for his Tacunum Sanitatis, but it's not on this text, if I understood correctly, that you will speak about tonight. Ibn Butlān's fake meat dishes for the sick, monks, and Christians during Lent, their tradition and late medieval reception. So please, if you want to share your screen and to speak, it's for you.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. I have recently worked more and more on the connection between the Arab world and Europe with regard to recipes. And since I'm also interested in food that pretends to be something else, these two things came together nicely. So Ibn Butlān's fake meat dishes and their traditional late medieval reception. The 11th century Baghdad physician Ibn Butlān, a Nestorian Christian, was famous in the Arab world for his medical works, above all the tabula Taqwim al-Siha, which was translated into Latin, as Bruno said, as Taqwinum Sanitatis, and circulated widely in late medieval Europe, where, for instance, it found access to such renowned institutions as the medical faculty of the University of Paris, where it was already commented on as early as 1370. Lavishly illustrated versions became prized possessions of princely libraries, and in the early 16th century, it even made it into print in Latin and German. Among Ibn Butlān's lesser known works is the Kunash al-Adira wal-Ruban, or translates into Medical Manual for the Use of Monks and Country People. It's a concise handbook of basic medical care geared towards the rural population, and it is modeled after Avicenna's canon of medicine, but it leaves out surgery. The text concludes with 2 chapters considered by the modern editor to be original contributions by the author, namely Chapter 41 with recipes for the sick, monks, and Christians during Lent, and Chapter 42 with recipes for incense and perfumes. Subject of my paper today will be the content of Chapter 41 of the Kunash with its fake meat dishes. In Arabic, those dishes are known as muzawwar dishes, their history and role in religion and medicine, and the reception of Ibn Butlān's collection of muzawwar recipes in the following centuries. Arabic medical writing in the Islamic Golden Age is characterized by encyclopedic works such as the Continents of Rasis of the early 10th century and Avicenna's canon of the early 11th century. This trend can also be observed in Andalusia with Averroes in the 12th century. Monumental works of this kind may have been useful for the instruction of medical students, but less so for the practicing physician in need of a quick reference guide, or also the educated layperson. It was Ibn Butlān who in the mid-11th century provided the first concise manual in tabular form dedicated to preventive medicine, his Taqwim al-Siha. In it, he covered primarily foodstuffs and some dishes, but also touched on the other 5 res non naturales, or non-natural causes of sickness and health, which together made up the traditional regimen sanitatis, or regimen of health. The format was so successful that it not only made Ibn Butlān a household name in the Arab world and later in Europe, but it inspired another Baghdad physician, Ibn Jazla, a few decades later to adopt it for a manual on diseases from head to toe, in Latin known as the Taqwini Egritudinum. For the Kunash al-Adira wal-Ruban, which we're talking about today, aimed at healthcare providers ranging from monks to lay people, Ibn Butlān chose a more traditional prose format, but conciseness was still his guiding principle. He only included diseases and their cures that people in the countryside would have been expected to deal with. In choosing this particular audience, Ibn Butlān created a novel type of handbook, one that was informed by the many travels he undertook and the needs of monks and other members of the religious community in treating the sick. As a factor that added urgency to his writing project, the author names the plague epidemic of 1054, to which many scholars and medical practitioners fell victim, thus resulting in a general decrease in medical knowledge. Ibn Butlān's Kunash is today accessible in a critical edition of the Arabic text by Samira Youssef Chardon as part of her dissertation in Islamic Studies at the University of California at Los Angeles. It is based on 6 Arabic manuscripts whose dating ranges from the 13th to the 18th century. Some of the extant manuscripts point to a reception of the Kunash by physicians in addition to the intended rural audience. The oldest manuscript from 1293, for instance, was copied by a physician in Haman, Syria, by the name of Nasr ibn Saki al-Din for his own use. The addition of drugs to the original by another author mentioned in one of the manuscripts is confirmed by that 1293 manuscript, which also reveals the name of the individual who added material. It was no other than Ibn Jazla, the Baghdad physician, a generation younger than Ibn Butlān, who drew much inspiration for his own work, as we have seen from his famous predecessor. Focusing on the preparation of dishes, incense, and perfumes, the last 2 chapters of the Kunash are a vivid illustration of the intended use of the text as a practical handbook for lay people in the religious community. The chapter on muzawwar, or fake meat dishes, entitled, quote, Chapter 41 on foods for the sick and monks and Christians for Lent fasting, unquote, opens with general guidelines how to turn the popular Arab soured stews, Hisrimiya, Sumakia, and Rumania, into vegetarian dishes by adding to a base preparation spinach and gourd. Further variations of the dishes are geared towards counteracting such things as diarrhea and reducing the density of a patient's humors. 16 recipes follow, 3 for baridar, or cold dishes, of which only the first one, for an eggplant dish, provides medical advice, informing the reader that it is for people with yellow bile as their dominant humor. The other 2 are for black-eyed beans in sweet sour sauce and crumbled bread in sweet sour sauce. The most complex recipe in this section is recipe 5, for masus, a smoky dish featuring fava beans, desert truffles, date palm inflorescence space, and carrots. The following 2 recipes are for simpler fare again: crumbled bread in fava bean broth called al-Thard, and a white stew of fava beans called XVIIth. In his more comprehensive section on Lenten foods, entitled, quote, As for foods that monks and Christians eat for Lent, Ibn Butlān again starts off with general guidelines for 3 soured stews, sikbaj, and 2 previously mentioned, Hisrimiya and Sumakia. For the following white stew Madeira, he recommends replacing meat and dairy with fava beans and nuts, a substitution equally applicable to 2 other bird stews, the golden-colored sirbaj and the blackish hubaishia. The text continues with Lenten versions for the meat porridge harissa, the fried ground meat dishes called makluvat, a lentil dish, and the sweet rice porridge bahatat. More elaborate is the layered pot pie, magmuma, that follows, for which the author also gives the jiggly variety known as arjuda. The Lenten dish section ends with 2 types of sandwiches, the open-faced smoky sandwich, shatair, and the pinwheel sandwiches named even after monks called the basmaward rubani. The final 2 recipes are for a condiment by the name of bun and the Byzantine sauce muri rumi. The Byzantine sauce is unusual in that it is the only recipe with exact weights and measurements, even stating the town to which the measuring system refers, namely Maya Farikin in today's Turkey. For food historians, chapter 41 ends on a tantalizing note in that it hints at a cookbook Ibn Butlān may also have written, quote, As for what we find of recipes in cookbooks of dishes that convince others of what they claim to be, namely fake dishes, such as an omelette, which in fact is not made with eggs, or yogurt that doesn't contain milk, these we have covered in our cookbook, unquote. But we don't have the cookbook. It was likely Ibn Butlān's striving for conciseness that made him choose a handful of well-known Arab dishes at the beginning of the two sections of chapter 41 and show how they can easily be turned into vegetarian dishes. The recipes that follow are for the most part short and without detailed information on quantities, except for that one that I mentioned. But where appropriate, they also provide alternative preparations, thereby further enlarging the number of dishes the shorter chapter provides. That the author combined recipes for the sick, monks, and Christians during Lent in one chapter made sense given the particular target audience for the Kunash. And in this regard, his chapter was an original contribution, as Chardon, the editor, had called it. But a look at food history in the Islamic Golden Age shows that neither the concept of vegetarian versions of meat dishes in religion and medicine, nor the term muzawwar for those fake dishes was new. A century before Ibn Butlān composed his Kunash, Ibn Sayyar al-Warraq compiled the first medieval cookbook anywhere, the Kitab al-Tabiq, a massive work of 615 recipes, which firmly put cookery in the context of humoral theory. It contains both a chapter on fake meat dishes as Lenten food for Christians, namely chapter 46, as well as one on muzawwar or fake dishes for the sick, which opens a whole section of 5 chapters on dishes dedicated to healing. And this is chapter 105, and all the other ones to 109 deal with healing. There are 5 more chapters towards the end of al-Warraq's cookbook that also deal with healing, chapters 122 to 26. The content of chapter 46 falls into 4 subgroups: 7 cold dishes again, 7 simulated fish, seafood, and dairy dishes, 6 shrimp dishes, and general instructions for turning 4 popular meat dishes, in al-Warraq's case, harissa, sikbaj, madira, and isfidbaj, into Lenten dishes. Ibn Butlān, a century later, was to put the general guidelines for turning popular meat dishes into Lenten dishes at the beginning of his chapter, and likewise gave 3 of the 4 dishes a prime of place, namely sikbaj, madira, and harissa. The recipes for subgroup 2, containing a shrimp dish without shrimp, a small fish relish without fish, 2 milk dishes without milk, an omelette without eggs, a milk-based fermented condiment without milk, and drained yogurt without milk, are the very types of dishes to which Ibn Butlān alluded in his conclusion to chapter 41 of the Kunash. In the 16 recipes of chapter 105, the emphasis is on vegetarian dishes for the sick, featuring such ingredients as gourd, chard, lettuce, herbs, seeds, and nuts. The medical disorders these dishes are designed to counteract are fevers, excess yellow bile, pleurisy, diarrhea, lost appetite, and stomach ailments. It's in the first 2 recipes of chapter 105 that al-Warraq gives us a hint as to the source for his muzawwar recipes. We read there, a recipe for muzawwara of gourd cooked for people with fevers from the copy of Ibn Mazawai. And the second recipe, the one that follows, says muzawwara recipe good for fevers and people suffering from excess of yellow bile, from the same copy. In other words, also from Ibn Mazawai. In fact, Ibn Mazawai is also invoked, as I said, in other chapters, in particular, chapter 106 and 107, and already earlier in chapter 40 and 43 of al-Warraq's cookbook. The medical author in question is the Nestorian Christian Johanna ibn Mazawai, who died in 857, personal physician to several caliphs and known in the West as Mesue. In addition to being famous for his translations of ancient medicine, he was the author of medical and dietetic texts as well as a cookbook. Ibn Butlān's chapter 41 of the Kunash, which, as was shown, has its roots in 9th and 10th century Baghdad medical and culinary literature, enjoyed a reception in the Arab world that lasted until the 15th century. His combination of muzawwar recipes for the sick, monks, and Christians during Lent, introduced each time by guidelines for easily converting popular meat dishes into vegetarian dishes, appealed to cookbook writers in the Middle East and North Africa. It was appended in its entirety to a substantially augmented 14th century version of al-Baghdadi's 13th century cookbook known as the Kitab Wasf al-Atima al-Mutada. Introduced with the words, quote, "There follows what sick people eat and monks and Christians during Lent" from the book of Ibn Abdun, chapter 14 on what sick people eat and monks and Christians during Lent, unquote. This one top copy manuscript, for example, of the cookbook identifies the source, namely Abul Hasan al-Mukhtar Ibn Abdun Ibn Butlān. And his chapter 41, although here it appears as 14, which I take as a scribal mistake of reversing the digits. To Ibn Butlān's stock of dishes in this manuscript and others, further vegetarian dishes were added over time, cabbage and turnip dishes, and also more general guidelines for preparing vegetarian dishes. After being sacked by the Mongols in 1258, Baghdad never regained its former glory, and the center of the Arab world shifted further west to Cairo. It is there that the biggest medieval Arab cookbook was compiled in the 14th century, the Kanz al-Fawaid fi Tanbi al-Mawaid, or Treasure Trove of Benefits and Variety at the Table, with no fewer than 820 recipes. It too contains a chapter on muzawwar dishes, chapter 8, entitled Vegetarian Dishes for the Nourishment of the Sick. With the Kitab Wasf, it shares Ibn Butlān's general guidelines for turning Hisrimiya, Sumakia, and Rumania into vegetarian dishes, including instructions for adjusting them to counteract diarrhea and reduce dense humors. Interestingly, the first 3 detailed recipes that follow go back to al-Warraq's chapter 105, with the 4th to follow towards the end of the chapter. 3 of them feature gourd and 1 the sour golden stew sirbaj, while the rest of the recipes contain the standard vegetarian muzawwar ingredients. Mung beans and pomegranate seeds play a more important role compared to al-Warraq, and new now is the use of Jew's mallow, which in the form of molokeya is to this day an Egyptian favorite. When medical benefits of a dish are provided in the Kanz, they are usually for 1 or 2 disorders. A notable exception are the last 2 recipes for sirbaj stew and a pomegranate seed dish, each recommended for a whole host of afflictions. In the 15th century, the anonymous Kanz, with its wealth of recipes and practical advice, served an Egyptian poet by the name of Ibn Mubarak Shah as the basis for a highly abridged version of approximately 330 recipes. As in the Kanz, a chapter on muzawwar dishes is included and found in the same place as in the source, sandwiched between a chapter on egg dishes and a chapter on fish. With the exception of the last 2 recipes, which are detailed and almost identical with recipe 226 and 227 of the Kanz, all the preceding ones are radically shortened, often just reduced to a brief alternative preparation, such as, quote, muzawwara with purslane, some make it with pomegranate seeds, unquote, or a medical indication, such as, quote, muzawwara with gourd for a feverish person, unquote, or a combination of both, such as, quote, muzawwara with pomegranate seeds for nausea is thickened with sugar, unquote. If one were to align this fragmentary material with the recipes in the Kanz, then the first 4 entries appear to point to the introduction, and the others to recipes 205 to 10 and 216. The general advice, quote, for each muzawwara use the appropriate spices and seasonings and the like, such as almonds and rose water, thickening them with breadcrumbs will be good, unquote. may constitute a new edition here by Ibn Mubarak Shah himself. Given the cultural transfer of knowledge between Orient and Occident in the Middle Ages, the question arises whether any of these recipes, with their assignation as fake or counterfeit, and their dual function in religion and medicine, reached Europe. Individual recipes for dishes such as Laimunia, Romania, Sumakia, or Magmuma found access to cookbooks from across the northern Mediterranean, and through Norman mediation even reached England. But in each case, as far as I can tell, it was the original meat dish that was transmitted. The only Arabic cookbook that made it to Europe were the 82 recipes extracted from Ibn Jazla's 11th century pharmacopoeia, the Minhaj al-Bayan, that were translated into Latin in Italy in the 13th and into Bavarian German in the 15th century. Only one dish in these European translations could be identified clearly that is also contained as a muzawwar recipe in the muzawwar chapter of an Arabic cookbook, namely mashia, a mung bean dish, which is recommended for coughs, and it is found in the Kans. A Latin or German rendition of the assignation muzawwar is, however, missing. Where we do come across the term counterfeit in European cookbooks is in Italian and French cookbooks, usually in connection with Lenten dishes only. Thus, Maestro Martino in his 15th century Libro de Arte Culinaria includes in chapter 4, ricotta contrafacta in quadragesima, that is ricotta, fake ricotta in Lent, and butiro contrafacto in quadragesima, that's fake butter in Lent. And in chapter 7, we find ova contrafacte in quadragesima, that is fake eggs in Lent. And in the northern French 15th century Vivandier, he lists a recipe 49, riz en galles condit contrefait. So that is a rice that is called counterfeit. In the Ménagier de Paris, the connection of the term with Lenten dishes is less pronounced. Recipe 147 uses the term for a bear imitation made from beef. Recipe 260 for Lenten risol or deep fried patties with imitation pine nuts. And recipe 206, in which, contrary to Lenten food, and this is a unique recipe here, Lenten food imitating meat dishes, what we have in the Ménagier is a meat dish, namely veal, trying to imitate salmon. So perhaps on account of the beautiful illustrations added to some manuscripts of the Latin Taqwinum Sanitatis by Ibn Butlān, it is a much abridged version of the original Taqwim that Ibn Butlān is mainly known for today. And yet the original tabular version in Arabic contains some 40 dishes and their medical benefits. A comparison of the Arabic, Latin, and German tabular version shows that those dishes and some rudimentary information on the types of dishes they were, presumably added by the Latin translator to give the European audience a rough idea what the recipes were about, made it into European translations. Furthermore, nearly all these dishes are also contained in the collection of recipes extracted from Ibn Jazla's pharmacopoeia, which likewise had a Latin and German tradition. This suggests that both physicians agreed to a large extent on the medical benefits of a substantial number of popular Arab dishes, but in both medical works, the Taqwim and the Minhaj al-Bayan, the authors refrained from using the term fake, as illustrated, for instance, by the mung bean recipe mashia, which is only called fake in the Egyptian cookbook Kans, but not in the Minhaj al-Bayan and its European reception. In the Kunash, by comparison, Ibn Butlān not only uses the term muzawwar freely, he dedicates a whole chapter to counterfeit fare. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would ask the participants to write their answers in the F&A or the Q&A, and we can start to answer them as soon as they come up.
Really, thank you to Melitta, because it's really a brilliant communication, and there's many ideas that we have listening to you. So I tried to choose some questions, not all the questions that I wanted to ask. If I understand correctly, the part for the vegetarian dishes, I would say that like this, for sick people, they still exist in the cookery tradition, in the Middle Eastern Islam. But what about the recipes for the monks and Christians during Lent? Did this part completely disappear, or did it remain? You know, you understand my question. It's not.
Yeah. Well, what happened with the Nestorian Christians being the ones who introduced it, and they came from their fast food, their Lenten food, and then applied it to medicine. And then in the Arab world, in the medical texts, the Christian side, the monks and Christians during Lent, that part gets suppressed more and more. That's why Ibn Butlān is probably one of the last major ones who actually pulls it together. And it kept the interesting thing, it keeps being passed on in the cookbook context. The Christian and the medical application. But it seems to lose the sort of Christian aspect in the medical texts as you get to the later Middle Ages in the Middle East. And what I found kind of intriguing, I looked so hard to find both a medical and religious application in Europe, but the medical one didn't seem to make it.
Yes,
this medical application.
Yes, there was debate. There were debates in Europe on the question of meat and the question of a non-meat regimen. For example, Arnaldo da Villanova wrote a treatise on the non-using of meat, in fact. But it's not exactly the same.
Does he use the term muzawwar or counterfeit or anything like that? I was combing.
I need to see it more deeply. Yes, after your communication, it gave me some ideas on the way to.
I was also looking through Connie Hyatt's concordance of all the English recipes. Anglo-Norman recipes, and the German ones, obviously, I know very well. And we can't even come up with a term equivalent to contrefait or counterfeit. It seems to work in some French and Italian cookbooks, but just in the Lenten sense, not the medical sense.
Yes. Another question, it's precise question. I'm not sure to have heard completely. In Ibn Jazla's work, there is 3 dishes that are quoted. You said Sumakia, Romania, and Limonia, no?
Yeah, not necessarily. Ibn Jazla has 82 recipes. He has those in there as well. What I was saying is, in some European cookbooks, those are the standard ones.
Yes.
Italian ones, and even all the way to Portugal that are all.
Because those dishes, Sumakia, Romania, and Limonia, are well known.
Yeah.
By the specialists, because it was Rodinson papers on this subject. But I found that Maimonides, for example, in his treatise on poison, use and describe these dishes particularly as a kind of dishes that you can easily poison, in fact. And this is why he is so interesting by this kind of dishes. So on these dishes, this group of dishes, I think there is really a history to do. Rodinson has done it, but maybe we can find new text on this question.
Well, with the vegetarian versions of it, which were the ones that I was interested in to find in Europe, two vegetarian muzawwar versions, and I didn't find any. It was usually the meat dishes that were transmitted.
Yeah, yes, that's true.
Yeah.
I spoke too much, as usual, so maybe Helmut.
Helmut, yeah.
And it seems there is a question, no?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Melitta, for the very interesting presentation. I got caught by the terms fake and counterfeit. And what I was wondering about is these terms today, I think, have a very negative connotation. Do we have to assume that also in the Middle Ages, these terms were kind of negative, or were they neutral or even positive? And the other question would be, is there any kind of evaluation of these dishes in the Middle Ages? If if it's okay to cook without meat or something like that.
Okay, so your first question sort of points back to one of my little hypotheses that I developed and had to abandon when Naval Nasrallah told me no. And that is, where I was trying to go at the end of my paper before I stopped short of doing that is that when medical writers write for their professional audience, they refrain from using the term fake, the muzawwar, but the cookbooks are fine with that. But apparently it turns out that's not the case. And I have now found examples too in medical texts where there was actually a Samarkandi that you guys in Graz were also using for the Nahrhaftes Mittelalter project. It has a list of some 30 dishes in it, and it's a medical text. And the very last is a musawwarat section where he talks about the medical application. So if that had a negative connotation, he probably wouldn't have put it into a sort of serious medical text. There is already in the late 9th century, a very famous Arabic mathematician and also physician who has also included a number of musawwar dishes with that name in it. So it had apparently quite a long tradition in the medical field as well. So what I was sort of tempted to do exactly what you thought was maybe this had a negative connotation in the medical profession. That doesn't seem to pan out. So I'm still working on that, but I'm getting more and more examples that it actually was not the case, that it was a negative term. What was your second question?
Yeah, thank you. The second question was if there is any kind if there are any kind of labeling remarks according to those dishes, or is it just, okay, we need those dishes for Lent, so here they are. Or so in terms of, I'm probably not making myself clear very much. So what you say is in terms in medical terms, the dishes are positive connotated because they're used for healing. And what about the social connotation? Yeah.
Well, okay, social connotation. We actually have a poem, and it's in Naval Nasrallah's edition of the al-Warraq cookbook. She quotes it, I think it's, would have been late 9th, 10th century poet who is rebelling against musawwarat dishes and basically says, I can't stand the doctors and their horrible vegetarian dishes, bring on the kebab and all the other good succulent meats and stuff. I've had enough of that. So that would suggest that there was a little bit of, with people who were prescribed those sorts of dishes, that they weren't always too thrilled about it. So on the social side, we do have a bit of comments there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. We have another question from the Q&A channel, but it's in French, so I will translate it in English if you don't mind.
Thank you.
We try to translate it in English. the oldest recipes in the Kitab, I suppose it's Kitab al-Tabir from al-Warraq, I suppose, seems to come from the culinary tradition of Babylonia and Roma. Babylonian, Nabatean, as they say in Baghdad, Babylonian and Roman culinary tradition. Was it especially the case for the vegetarian dishes? Interesting question.
Was that the case with those dishes? Well, some of the suggestions by Arabists are that the medical application of the vegetarian dishes may have been influenced by by people like Galen, the medical writers of antiquity, who were suggesting cooling ingredients. And Musandinos also talks about that. If you have fever, take this and that. And there may have been a confluence of that concept of antiquity with the muzawwar, the fake dishes. So I don't know if they go directly back to very old, where we first tablets with the first recipes.
Yes.
We've been recreated recently. It's a possibility, but the other strain is probably antiquity, because those Nestorian translators, they were very familiar. They were translating Galen, and they probably would have come across some of those recommendations there as well for cooling dishes with vegetables like gourd and lettuce and squash, that sort of thing.
Cooling dishes is an important idea, of course. Thank you so much. We have to close this first part. Thank you very much. And we ask for Hélène Jawhara-Piñer. She's here?
Yes, I am.
Yes. Hello, she's hello. Hélène Jawhara-Piñer got a PhD in 2019. That means 2 years ago, at the University of Tours, with a subject on the heritage and also food heritage, but a food heritage using Arabic cookery and Arabic recipes and Jewish cookery. So it's an intercross subject. She will publish it soon at the Academic Studies Press in Boston. And to open our appetite, she publishes this month a book of recipes of the Jews of Spain and the diaspora from the 13th century to today, under the title Sephardi Cooking the History. She will quit our symposium to speak to another one in Spain, just in some days, on la comida en la cultura europea entre la Edad Media y el Renacimiento. Sorry for my Spanish. So please, Hélène, you share your screen and you begin to speak about the subject, the making of braids, a recipe, reflection on Challah recipe and origin.
Okay, so thank you so much, Bruno, and everyone as the organizer of this session. So before starting my talk, I would like to inform the attendees that part of this paper has already been published in an article I wrote 5 months ago for Melitta, which is an international review of Sephardic studies of the University of Pablo de Olavide of Sevilla. Nevertheless, my talk underscores elements that are not mentioned in it. As everyone knows, talking about food could sometimes sometimes be complex and leads to tensions. I hope it won't be the case today. This situation could furthermore happen when one speaks about food and Jewish practices, as the two elements are inherent one from the other. In this paper, I would like to highlight a recipe mentioned in an Arabic cookbook written in the southern Spain in the 13th century under Muslim domination, and which bears the name of the making of braids. It could be part of the Jewish culinary heritage. Today I present it as a dish, not as a tool that reflects directly Judaism. So before starting the hostilities, or I hope not, let's be sure that everyone knows the dish we will be talking about. As you can see, what is nowadays known under the term challah is a braided bread loaf. So you can see on the left side, the braided bread that I realized I did with, and that corresponds to the recipe that we are going to talk about today. The photo that is in the middle is another braided bread, and the photo of the right is to a bread that is not braided, but it's coined, okay, but the three photos represent what is nowadays known as challah. So, challah is a word that has much written about it. From biblical times to the present day, this term has been a source of interest and curiosity, especially for Jews. Many scholars and lovers of Jewish cuisine have ventured into an historical and culinary research, more or less risky and often repetitive, on the term's origins, as well as on the dish called challah. This word, also written challah with H, has a biblical origin. It is mentioned several times in the Bibles as the first portion of your dough you shall separate a loaf for a gift. Many studies use this writing to establish the origin of the eponymous dish, the challah braided bread. Some studies have already been done on bread and challah as a piece of dough in biblical writings. Therefore, it is not a matter of going back to this, but rather on questioning the absence of old historical references concerning the challah as a dish, since its origin and temporal periods have already been advanced. Wouldn't this deficiency explain the error made in regards to the territorial origin of the dish's preparation? From this observation, all that remains is to study the sources that deal with this dish in order to trace its spatial and temporal route from Eastern Europe to the existence of its first recipe. The aim is to lift the veil on the origin of this braided bread. So after this brief, but nonetheless necessary introduction about what is challah in the present day, it's time to ask where could be found the first known recipe of it. To answer this question, I deliberately decided to track back the sources, starting from the current day consideration we have concerning this braided bread to its potentially first recipe written in an Iberian cookbook from the late Middle Ages. There are many stories written on the challah bread, which abound and recur themselves, both online and in the culinary books. Yet, there is little information actually drawn from historical sources about this dish. That is why a look to the reference books is necessary. The online etymology dictionary tells us that in 1887, the challah braided bread was a type of bread usually braided and typically eaten on Jewish ceremonial occasions. This detail is consistent with the publication in Philadelphia in 1871 of Esther Levy's first Jewish cookbook, Jewish Cookery Book. If the term challah is not mentioned, the author nevertheless incorporates a recipe for twist bread that corresponds to it. Its integration into the consumption of American, implicit North American Jews probably dates back to the publication of this book. Gilmark's Encyclopedia of Jewish Food, or Eat and Be Satisfied, written by John Cooper, the Jewish Catalog, and the Treasures of Shabbat have all dwelt on the braided bread's characteristic as an emblem of the culinary heritage of the Jews. This explanation has allowed to put both topics, history and food, in the same area. There are many confusions around its culinary history. Gilmark's emphasizes the importance of the consumption of challah bread among the Sephardi are the Jews from Spain and the Arabian Peninsula, and the Ashkenazi, the Jews from Eastern Europe. However, Gilmark's highlights that there are differences in the type of flour, whole flour for the Ashkenazi and white flour for the Sephardim, in the form of the challah bread, which is rather cold in the Sephardic practices. Nonetheless, he provides further details regarding the challah braided bread of some Sephardic communities, which would also sprinkle sesame or other types of seeds over the round loaves, an allusion to the manna that fell in the form of coriander seeds. By choosing its shape and certain ingredients, the relation between the challah bread and the Sephardim is now more conceivable, and it presents the braided bread as the original dish. Let's keep in mind that bread preparation remains basic: flour, water, sourdough, and salt. Therefore, it is the way in which it will be kneaded, the ingredients that will be added, but also and above all, the shape that will be given to it and the way it will be cooked that will make this bread different from the others. Since then, it acquires a singular symbolic value to the extent of being used as a differentiating food in a multicultural context. In the article Challah, a richly fascinating history published in the Jewish Herald Voice, Jonathan Fass writes that in both Ashkenazi and Sephardi Jewry, there is also a tradition to change the shape of the challah to connect it to the time of the year of a common holiday. At the beginning of the 20th century, John Cooper argues that this braided bread was first coined in Austria in the 15th century, and that before bearing the name of challah, it was called berches. This name is still used by some Jews to refer to the challah bread nowadays. Even so, no historical sources is mentioned by the author. Gilmark's takes up this idea by writing that in the 15th century, Jews in Austria and southern Germany adopted a new form of Shabbat bread, an oval braided loaf modeled on a popular totemic bread, which was called Bershibrod or Pershibrod in southern Germany. The key to understand this dish lies in the analysis of a new technique, the braiding. Gilmark's claimed that it was born from the German who, after converting to Christianity, would have twisted dough to resemble hair and offered the loaf to Chol, the witch, to escape her punishment. The present characteristic form of the braided bread would therefore have its origin according to these words in the culinary culture of the Jewish Ashkenazi from the Middle Ages. The Encyclopedia of Jewish Folklore and Tradition is not the only one to repeat this premise. In the chapter Jewish Ashkenazi in Gastronomy in Northern Italy and in the early modern period, the testimony of the book of Mizmot Chanashim, Zahava Weiss deals with religious laws for Challah in the Jewish Ashkenazi cuisine. She writes that the Ashkenazi Jews who settled in northern Italy and the Po Valley assimilated to the Italian way of life. The book entitled Mitzvot Chanashim, which dates back to the 15th century, reinforces the conclusion that Ashkenazi Jewry adaptation to Italian culture and life took about a century more until it was fully completed. We understand, in fact, that we must backtrack in history in order to find the origin of the braided bread. From Germany, it could have passed through Austria to arrive in Italy. Now the question is, where did the first Sephardic people of Italy come from? A subject that is still very debated nowadays. It should be remembered that the various expulsions suffered by the Jews of Christian Europe have Italy as a place to stay. Thus, it is not surprising that this country has seen both the Germanic coming from the north and the Sephardim from the south. The Jews of Spain who fled the Spanish Inquisition, established as early as 1478, also in force on its territories such as Sicily, emigrated to settle mainly in Morocco and Turkey, but also in Italy. Therefore, it's a possibility that they are able to find. Therefore, it's still logical to be able to find in Italy, but also in Austria and Germany, dishes from these two Jewish communities. So, why couldn't the braided bread accompany the Jews from Spain who came to settle in Italy from the end of the 15th century? Now, let's have a look to what the analysis of Iberian sources offer us, and more specifically, those from Spain concerning this braided bread. A singular food that the Encyclopedia of Jewish Food defines as a braided egg loaf. The importance of eggs in the Challah braided bread is also highlighted in the other Encyclopedia of Jewish Folklore and Traditions, in which it is described as an egg-rich braided bread. The discovery of a recipe written in Arabic in the first cookbook from southern Spain in Al-Andalus, called the Kitab al-Kabir, so the cookbook, could offer some answers. Written under Muslim rules, it is the first and unique medieval Western cookbook to contain Jewish dishes. Among the 462 recipes that it contains, 6 are explicitly Jewish recipes. I mean by that, and by that I mean that in the title we can read the term Jewish. We can read the term Jewish. However, my research has shown the existence of other dishes scattered in the cookbook, which are and still prepared and consumed nowadays by Sephardic Jews, mainly from Morocco and Spain, but mainly from Morocco. A careful and meticulous reading allowed me to uncover a very singular recipe. In the manuscript, This recipe bears the name of Amal al-Dafair, which means the making of braids, as you can see in the slide. The term braids corresponds to the word dafair in Arabic. No other sources or recipes from the same period of this cookbook mention that term dafair. What is interesting is that the Spanish translation of this recipe from Ambrosio Luis Miranda offers the word guedejas in Spanish for the term braids in English. And the closest translation for guedejas is the term peot in Hebrew. Peot are in fact the hair that the Orthodox Jews have on both sides of the face. The recipe translated by the making of braids in the Andalusian cookbook of the 13th century corresponds very closely to the preparation of the challah braided bread. It consists of white flour or semolina, which after being moistened with hot water should be well kneaded. Sifted flour is added again, and then sourdough and salt. Hot water is poured several times, and the dough is kneaded to obtain a medium consistency. Then, for each the rattle is approximately 500 grams. So for each rattle semolina, 5 eggs must be added, and 1 dirham, so it's approximately 4 grams of saffron. As we can see, the large amount of eggs and the importance of the yellow color of the bread should be highlighted. The recipe states that the dough has to be well kneaded and then put in a dish, covered and left to rise. Once raised, it is necessary to fill a pan of fresh oil and boil it over the heat. When preparation is ready, it's the moment to prepare the braids of raised dough, like hair braids of a handspan of or less in size. After coating them with oil, braided breads are fried until they turn brown. Once cooked, they must be put in a plate and poured over them skimmed honey, spiced with pepper, cinnamon, and spikenard. Then ground sugar is sprinkled over it. In fact, this dish is unique. Its resemblance to the nowadays challah braided bread is more than surprising. Egg, flour, eggs, sourdough, salt, and of course, the braiding techniques, so characteristic of this dish. 2 unexpected elements are mentioned in this recipe of braided bread. First, the size. Since it is smaller than the challah braided bread that are currently prepared and consumed in the present day. Second, the baking, because in the medieval recipe, the braided bread is fried and is not baked in the oven, as it is the case nowadays. Nevertheless, it should be remembered that olive oil was mainly used by the Jews of Spain, both in frying and in culinary preparations. Its massive consumption among Iberian Jews also made it stand out from Muslims' culinary foodways, who certainly used oil, but also smen, which is a rancid a practice much less followed by the Jews. The mention of the challah braided bread by the famous Spanish Jew and exegete Abraham ibn Ezra from the 12th century supports the existence and consumption of this dish in Spain, at least from the 11th century. In addition, the rabbi and the commentator specifies that this braided bread must be thick. One more important point needs to be remembered and underscored. The fact that the making of bread recipe of the cookbook from the 13th century doesn't explicitly mention the term Jewish, neither in the title nor in the process. But this doesn't mean that it wasn't a recipe made by the Jews, because in fact this is what happened with other recipes of the Kitab al-Tabir. Culinary techniques and holiday customs made Jewish dishes more identifiable. Before finishing my paper, I would like to talk about something very interesting and deals with the Inquisition. Because something seems not to match. Nowadays, the challah braided bread is inherent to Shabbat liturgical practices. It is not a food that Jews consume during the week, at least nowadays. If this would have happened in the late Middle Ages, the consumption of this braided bread by Jews to celebrate Shabbat would have been mentioned in Inquisition trials, like many other food practices. But I have never found a reference in the time of Inquisition that there was bread on the Shabbat table. If bread were required for the Kiddush rituals, and even more so braided, it would have been easily observable. It would appear in the list of customs distributed to the neighbors, or in confessions, or interrogatories, but nothing. So here we are, and I think we can make various hypotheses. Our consumption of braided bread for a Jewish holiday is a modern culinary customs, which is not mainly shared by the Sephardim nowadays. Nevertheless, we cannot dismiss the possibility that this making of bread recipe could have been made by the Jews in the 13th century. Or the braided bread loaf was a Jewish dish in the 13th century, but it wasn't consumed for holiday. Or eating braided bread became dangerous for Jews in the late Spanish Middle Ages, that it wasn't served on Shabbat tables anymore. But this, I think that is the less probable idea, because culinary Jewish practices are very persistent. So this making of bread could have moved with the diaspora, mainly with the Jews who settled in Italy in the 15th century. Just before finishing, really this time, you can find here a reconstruction I did of this recipe of the 13th century, as close as possible to the original recipe. I don't think if you remember about that, but in the second slide, I think it was, you could see different photos that of challah, okay? So they were all baked, and this one on this slide is exactly the recipe, and it is fried exactly as the process I follow exactly the same process as the one which is written in the Kitab al-Tabir of the 13th century. And that's all.
Thank you very much. we can come to questions again. Just write any questions you might have in the Q&A function, and I'm sure they will be answered. Yes, Bruno, please.
Bruno has always a question. just really a little question, small questions. You quote John Cooper, who speaks of Berches.
Yes.
Which language is it? It's
I think I think it's in Germany. Yes, as I do not speak German, so for me I'm just looking for.
Yeah, we have German speakers.
Yes.
Maybe help us. I don't know.
It's Germany. I'm just looking for where I said that it was called Berches and underscored that this name is still used by some Jews to refer to the Challah braided bread nowadays in Austria or Germany. Okay. So, yes. And yes.
Is it Yiddish or not? I don't know.
In fact, I understand Ladino, but I do not understand Yiddish. so as I do not understand German too, so I'm sorry, I cannot answer your question, but maybe some scholars of this panel could answer for me.
Okay.
Otherwise, Melitta Adamson also has a question.
Yes, I was going to ask about the connection with the modern Austrian word Stritzel, which is the braided bread. And according to Wikipedia, Yiddish communities in different regions of Europe were using berches, which was mentioned here,
yes.
But also things like Stritzel as a Yiddish word. But if you look at the etymology of Stritzel, it goes all the way back to Old High German. So I wonder if one needs to look into the history from the German side, maybe a little bit more.
Yes.
Of how far back this goes and the connection between the Germanic and Yiddish communities there. It certainly has survived till today. In every bakery you can get a Stritzel, but it has raisins usually in it.
Yes, I think it's a good idea. In fact, I really thought about going to investigate in sources that can be found in Germany concerning this dish, but I don't speak German, and even less, I cannot read even less German. So, but I think, yes, in fact, it could be very, very interesting to try to find information related to the braided bread in Germany. Or yes, I think, because everybody talks about this dish, but in fact, few people have answered.
Yeah, it might take you quite far back to the early Middle Ages, the history of it. So it might be useful.
Yes.
We also now have a few questions in the Q&A. First, Cornelius Berthold, thanks for the talk. Do you know any old evidence of braided bread from a non-Jewish context? If I recall correctly, there was bread or bread-like dishes in various shapes in ancient Mesopotamia. And as braiding is an almost universal technique, one would expect it to pop up elsewhere as well.
Oh, can you repeat the first part? I'm sorry.
Yes, of course. Do you know any old evidence of braided bread from a non-Jewish context?
I do not know any bread from non-Jewish context, in fact. But always a problem with you talk about Jewish cuisine and other things related with Jewish cuisine is that a lot of people eat food which is in relation with the Jewish practices. but they do not that they don't know about that, and it's just because they like this food. So in fact, no, I have no idea about. I haven't investigated in non-Jewish sources that could mention this dish. Or I started investigating, but I haven't found anything.
The next question is related. Also, thank you both for the presentations. Do you think there is a relation between Easter bread prepared in the Middle East, Turkey, for example, and Challah bread? Easter bread is not braided, but the texture resembles.
I must say that the next question is the same. Maybe. Maybe you can read it. No.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I would like to mention an egg and yeast-raised braided bread, which seems to be similar to challah. It is an Easter holiday bread made by the Eastern Catholic community of northeastern Hungary and eaten solely as part of the Easter holiday meal. It might be an adaptation of the Russian kulik, but interestingly, its name is related to Pesach. Do you think there might have been a connection between the two breads of these two religious communities?
Yes, I think so, obviously. Yes, in fact, there are many relations between the Jews and the other people when they are living very close one from the other. And yes, of course, as in the Jewish culinary practices, we can find many dishes that has been not taken but shared between everyone. So yes, of course.
Thank you. Barbara De Nicolo, also same direction. Why is it a braid? Has that a special meaning? I know braids for All Saints Day. So also holiday related, but why the braiding?
Why the braiding?
Yeah.
That's why. Okay, why the braiding? In fact, if you look at for example, at the braiding for the braiding law the Sephardim make for different holidays in the Jewish calendar, you can find a challah too, which have a different shape because it is also braided, but the form is quite different, but it's because it is round braided. So and this challah braided dish is round because it remembers it remembers in fact the life and the cycle of the life, and it is also prepared for the holiday of Hanukkah, which is at the end of in December, in fact, and which is a very important holiday for the Jewish people. So it is braided, and also it is braided, but in a different shape.
Oh, okay. Also, for all, Özki Zamanki posted a link to the Turkish bread he was referring to, which is similar in preparation or in the dough. You can find that in the Q&A.
Yes, this is not surprising, in fact, because a lot of Jews, when they were expelled from Spain in 1492, went to Turkey because Turkey accepted all the Jews, and so a very important community starting there since 1492. So of course, it's there are in Turkey a very important. You can find Jewish culinary practices in Turkey because yes, for this reason, for the diaspora, when started the diaspora from Spain in the 15th century.
Mm.
Yes, we have an addition also from Askizamanki. Yes, but this bread is for Easter celebration for Christians in Turkey.
Yes, but in fact, this is not surprising one more time, because in fact, for example, in Spain, you can find for Easter, because in fact, what we have to understand is that the Easter of the Christians and Pesach of the Jews takes place in the same moment of the year. They mainly have just 2 or 3 days different, or maybe sometimes they are exactly in the same moment. So you can find, for example, in Spain, culinary dishes made for Easter, like the hojuelas, for example, that are exactly the same that the Sephardim Jews used to do for Pesach, so for the Easter of the Jews. So this is not surprising.
Another related question by Cécile Chevalier. The recipe seems to be quite typical, even ignoring the specific shape. Lots of eggs, saffron, boiled. Are there evidence of similar recipes, for example, the ingredients without the braided form? And I think you touched on that already.
Yes, if you look at the ingredients, as I told, they are very basic. So just flour, so eggs and chardonnay and salt. So in fact, okay, that's right. If you just look at the ingredients, you can do a lot of dishes that are not specifically Jewish. I totally agree. So, but the difference is the braided, in fact. And this is very, very important. And when, for example, Ambrosio Miranda translated the term dafa'ir in Arabic by peot, which is the Hebrew word for the hair. So this is so curious, and this was very, very intriguing, in fact.
We have another question concerning Easter. Do you think these Easter breads might be understood as deliberate Christian borrowings of Jewish practices?
I don't know. I don't know. I can say, I think that it could be the case. I think we have to, it would be easier to answer this question talking about every special dishes. Okay, we cannot make a generality. I think we just have to talk and develop this idea when we have one dish when we can talk about one special dish, in fact. But this is, once more, this is not surprising that there is dishes that are prepared by Christians for Easter, and others that are prepared for Pesach, so by the Jews. And I told about the hojuelas, but another dish that is very interesting is the dish that we know under the term of mona, which is or muna. That depends, in fact, because it's a dish that once more it's like love around like that, and it is made in Spain, for example. It's like that, and we put an egg, a whole egg inside with the shell, and we just put dough over, and we can find this practice in southern Spain, because I live in Spain, so I can tell you, and we can find this very special shape. Which is made for Easter for the Easter Christian holiday, and exactly the same for the Jewish holiday, to celebrate quite the same thing. So yes, that's very interesting. This crisscrossing, in fact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we have to stop this.
It was the last question in the Q&A. No one is raising their hand, so. Of course, it's really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you to you, Julia.
So I have to make I have to do a conclusion, but very short. I would say that the name of the session was Out of the East. So out of the East, we went towards the West and returning to the East in the last talk. So thank you very much to the speakers. Thank you very much to the Q&A moderator. Thank you very much to all the attendees that ask some question. Reminds that the recorded session will be available tomorrow. This is a promise. After the day after on the CoReMA YouTube channel. So please, if you want to see again these debates, please look at the CoReMA YouTube and say to people, you know, that people who couldn't see the debate to connect with the YouTube channels. Goodbye to everyone. And have a good dinner in France. I don't know about in the Canada and so on. We are hungry. I am hungry.
Thank you.
Thank you.